The Imperial High Council chamber buzzed with quiet disdain as the ambassador from Earth concluded his transmission. A low chuckle rippled through the assembled ranks of admirals, lords, and scientists. At the far end, Lord Commander Thalvarek leaned forward, taloned fingers steepled, amusement curling across his thin-lipped mouth. "Projectile weapons," he repeated, savoring the words like a bitter joke. "Chemically propelled kinetic slugs. Ancient toys." An adjutant stepped forward, holding a shimmering data slate. "My lord, intelligence confirms the Terran colonies have not yet developed directed energy weaponry or even basic plasma shielding. Their forces rely on ballistic rifles, rotating cannons, and mobile artillery platforms, machines with moving parts." Laughter again. A scientist muttered, "Moving parts. Obsolete by 10 millennia." The consensus was clear. Humanity was a technological footnote, an ambitious upstart clawing its way into a galaxy it did not yet understand. They had achieved faster-than-light travel, barely. They'd colonized a few marginal systems, settled harsh rocks for meager resources, and now, laughably, claimed territorial independence. The Empire would remind them of their place. Thalvarek stood, violet robes swirling, voice smooth and deliberate. "Deploy a containment force to Outpost 17X on the mineral world they call Duranis. Secure the facility. Detain any resistors. Minimize property damage. Shall we prepare precision drones or phase shock units?" "No need," Thalvarek said with a dismissive wave. "Send the 51st Imperial Shock Battalion. Let them stretch their legs. A display of force will suffice. These humans will kneel when they witness true power." In the silence that followed, the only sound was the soft hum of crystalline data feeds projecting holographic overlays of the Terran presence. Blocky structures, primitive EM signatures, low-orbit defense satellites. The fleet departed within the hour. As the Imperial ships tore through hyperspace, their commanders reviewed footage of human military operations. Grainy images of soldiers in armor plating. Shell casings flying through the air. Muzzle flashes. "They fight like it's still the age of steel," one officer scoffed. A younger lieutenant leaned forward, frowning slightly. "But they win. Against odds. Even when outnumbered." He was ignored. On Earth, military analysts decoded intercepted Empire transmissions. The term most frequently used was primitive. It wasn't the first time humans had been underestimated. Colonel Dana Vurik stood on the edge of a ridge overlooking Durrani's red canyons. The mining base sprawled below, a mesh of steel structures and makeshift defenses. Her expression was hard as flint. "They're coming," she said simply. Her XO grimaced. "Think they'll talk first?" "No," she replied, turning. "They'll try to demonstrate superiority. We'll demonstrate recoil." Across the outpost, human troops dug in. Old-fashioned trenches, camouflaged bunkers, range markers etched into rock. Ammunition was stacked, belts coiled like serpents, weapon barrels cooled and ready. A technician tapped the side of a rusted turret. "You think this junk can stop energy weapons?" A grizzled sergeant grinned. "We won't stop them. We'll ruin them." 3 days later, the Empire's forces entered Durrani's orbit. Their descent was elegant, sleek black landers gliding through the sky like obsidian daggers. The locals watched with binoculars and steady breaths. "Let them come close," Vurik ordered. "Let them feel safe." The Empire's arrogance wasn't just cultural. It was operational. They deployed in open formation, shields glowing, armor polished, energy rifles humming with stored power. It was a procession, not an assault. Then came the broadcast. "This settlement now falls under Imperial control. Lay down arms. Compliance will be rewarded. Resistance will be eliminated." The humans didn't respond. From a command tent on the ridge, Vurik watched the display. Her lips barely moved. Weapons free. In that moment, the galaxy's oldest empire met one of its youngest species in battle. Only one had learned the value of brutality. Only one had spent centuries perfecting the art of close-quarter slaughter under impossible odds. Only one believed in the gospel of kinetic chaos. And it wasn't the Empire. The The first shot wasn't grand. A single crack like a bone snapping in the cold. It took the helmet off a lead trooper at 400 meters. The second shot was a burst. A human machine gun, mounted on a sandbag position, roared to life, stitching the front ranks with thumb-sized metal slugs moving faster than sound. The third was a barrage, mortars arcing from behind a rocky outcrop, falling with old-fashioned mechanical whistles and devastating precision. Within 60 seconds, the polished formation was in chaos. Shields flared and shattered under the raw kinetic force. Armor dented, crumpled, tore. The Empire's elegant order collapsed into screaming confusion. Thalvarek's field commanders sent panic transmissions. They're not using standard targeting systems. We can't jam them. They're bullets. They're going through our armor. We can't track their fire. They're firing too fast. In orbit, the fleet hesitated. What they saw made no sense. How could primitive slug throwers, machines without guided tracking, without heat-seeking munitions, cause such devastation? Because they weren't just weapons. They were the legacy of a species forged in war. Weapons built not for intimidation, but for obliteration. Tools shaped by centuries of desperation, trench warfare, attrition, urban combat, and insurgency. Built to survive anything. Built to make others not survive at all. The Empire's drop ships touched down with precision, their hulls gleaming under Durrani's pale sun. Dust plumed around them as grav-lift doors hissed open, revealing platoons of armored troops marching in perfect formation. They advanced confidently across the rocky basin, unaware they were walking into the jaws of something they couldn't understand. The human defense lines lay silent, hidden in hardened positions carved into the cliffs overlooking the basin. No energy signatures, no calm chatter, just still air and tension thick enough to cut. Lieutenant Marek of the 51st Imperial Shock Battalion raised his visor, scanning the horizon with disdain. No resistance. We move in and secure the ridge, he said, his voice bored. Scanners detect low-tier munitions, outdated metallic. Nothing that can breach Class B armor. He didn't notice the faint shimmer of a range flag barely peeking over the rocks. 300 meters away, Sergeant Cole adjusted the elevation on his mounted machine gun. The weapon was a relic by galactic standards. 30 kilograms of iron and fury, belt-fed and recoil-hardened. He tapped the feed box once, then leaned into the stock. His spotter gave a simple nod. The first burst hit like thunder. 7 Imperials fell in an instant, their energy shields barely flickering before they failed entirely. The rounds didn't stop. They punched through alloy plating, shredded internal servos, and scattered limbs across the red soil. The formation faltered. A second machine gun lit up from the eastern flank, then a third from the far ridge. Within 10 seconds, the basin was a kill box. The Imperials scrambled for cover, but there was none. Their doctrines had never accounted for kinetic saturation, waves of bullets filling the air with lethal velocity. Plasma weapons had made cover obsolete in their minds. But the humans fought differently. They made cover sacred. A forward squad tried to deploy drones. The EMP from a hand-cranked field disruptor disabled them before they could rise 5 meters. The drones dropped like stones. Mortars followed, timed to the rhythm of suppression fire. Each impact was devastating, flinging Earth and soldiers alike into the air. These weren't guided shells. They didn't need to be. They had been zeroed in by humans using grease pencils, rangefinders, and raw instinct. Lieutenant Marek tried to rally. Advance with shields raised. Close the distance. The troops complied, pushing forward in staggered files. Then came the high-caliber thunder from the west. The heavy machine gun opened up from a concealed platform bolted into a decommissioned mining mech. The mech itself was a rusted shell, but its servos still functioned. It didn't walk. It didn't need to. All it did was pivot and unleash. The gun was massive. 50 caliber slugs fed from a belt 2 meters long. Every fifth round was an armor-piercing tracer. It turned the front rank of Imperials into red mist. Marek screamed over comms, demanding orbital support. The fleet above responded with confusion. Identify hostile emplacements. He couldn't. The humans had buried their heat signatures beneath layers of thermally shielded tarp and rock. They didn't emit anything to target. Requesting coordinated strike, grid, Delta 7. Coordinates are indistinct. Multiple ghost readings. Unable to confirm hostile positions. The Imperial command structure began to fray. Individual squads acted without orders, taking cover behind rocks and wreckage, trying to return fire. Energy bolts sizzled through the air, but found no targets. The humans were dug in, covered, silent between bursts. They didn't waste shots. They made every round count. In one corner of the basin, an Imperial trooper managed to get close to a trench. He raised his rifle and prepared to fire, only to be yanked in by a tripwire trap. A bayonet met him before he hit the dirt. This wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Across the field, Corporal Reyes reloaded with practiced speed. Her knuckles were raw from handling the old belt feeds. Her voice was calm. Shift to Sector 4. They're regrouping. Sergeant Cole adjusted fire, ripping into the new cluster before they even got into formation. The gun stuttered once, overheated. He smacked it with a wrench and kept firing. There was no grace, only brutality. The Empire's vaunted tactics meant nothing here. Their formations were too clean, their response times too slow. They relied on tech that assumed a certain kind of enemy, predictable, orderly, dependent on comparable tools. Humans had never fought like that. Every time the Empire sent a probe, a drone, a hoverbike scout, it disappeared in a burst of shrapnel or EMP. Their officers were picked off by snipers. Their radio relays jammed with static. Their medics couldn't keep up. By the third hour, the Imperial detachment had lost over 100 troops. 50 wounded lay screaming, unattended. Extraction requests went unanswered. Above, the fleet feared sending more ships down without knowing where the human anti-air was, despite there being none. The fear itself was enough. Lieutenant Marek, now bleeding from a shoulder wound, sat behind a half-destroyed mobile shield wall. He stared blankly at the basin, once a staging ground, now a graveyard. He keyed his comm. They're not fighting to win. They're fighting to break us. No one responded. The sun began to set. In the fading light, another heavy gun barked from the ridge. It wasn't aimed at anyone in particular. It didn't have to be. The message had already been sent. The Empire had come to teach the primitives a lesson. Instead, they learned what real war looked like. Smoke lingered in the valley like a second atmosphere. The Empire's elite had tasted their first defeat in centuries, and they were furious. Retaliation came swiftly. Coordinated orbital strikes burned patches of the ridge to glass. They unleashed their war walkers, quadrupedal siege platforms bristling with plasma cannons, along with full-spectrum suppression drones. It was no longer a pacification mission. It was eradication. But humans had seen worse. As the war machines approached, the defenders didn't panic. They adapted. The colony's mechanics stripped old mining rigs, bolting armor plates over hydraulic frames. Engineers installed rotating gun mounts where drill heads once were. The machines groaned and sputtered, but they moved. That was enough. The walkers fired first. Blinding arcs of superheated energy leveled the forward trenches. For a moment, it looked like the Empire had turned the tide. But then, the human response came, not from direct return fire, but from behind and below. Corporal Yarrow, soaked in mud and sweat, twisted a crank that activated a buried rail cart system beneath the canyon floor. 100 meters away, explosives hidden in hollowed-out or carts detonated beneath the legs of an Imperial walker. The blast sheared its support struts, sending the multi-ton machine crashing into the canyon wall. Above, snipers used analog scopes, completely immune to electronic jamming, to pick off support crews and drone operators. Radio silence was kept religiously. Orders were passed by flares, hand signals, and runners. EMP bursts knocked out the enemy's tactical HUDs. They were blind, exposed, and forced into close-quarters combat they weren't trained for. In one sector, Sergeant Alden led a team of 4 against an Imperial push. They used iron sights, suppressed SMGs, and decades of urban warfare tactics learned in the ruins of old Earth. They didn't just fight from cover. They became the cover, vanishing into debris, flanking through collapsed tunnels, hitting hard and disappearing before the Empire could react. An Imperial officer tried to stabilize his line by deploying personal shield domes. The humans didn't attack them directly. They waited until the dome's internal oxygen filters failed, then launched smoke canisters inside. The Empire had never trained to suffocate inside their own technology. It wasn't just tactics, it was mentality. The humans weren't holding ground. They were making every meter cost blood. The Empire believed in superiority. The humans believed in pain tolerance. One side needed a win. The other refused to lose. Inside the bunker command, Colonel Vurick read the updated casualty reports. They were losing people. Good people. Brave people. But the kill ratio was holding. For every human lost, 5 Imperials fell. That wasn't luck. That was will. She nodded to the comms officer. Deploy Echo Team. Deep within the canyon, a hulking shape stirred. It had once been a mining exosuit designed to haul tons of ore. Now it was clad in steel plating, jury-rigged actuators, and a dual-mounted machine gun system stolen from a crash transport. Inside, Private First Class Nils adjusted the harness. He wasn't a pilot. He was a mechanic. But he could aim. When the exosuit stepped onto the battlefield, the Imperials paused. They didn't recognize the machine. It had no energy signature, no AI guidance, no sleek silhouette. It just stomped forward and opened fire. The sound was primal. 2 heavy guns barked in alternating rhythm. The slugs tore through shield walls, walker armor, even defensive drones. The suit wasn't fast. It wasn't elegant. But it was unstoppable. The Empire hadn't prepared for that. One of their commanders ordered a focus strike. 5 plasma troopers locked on, directing their fire. The exosuit caught the blast square in the chest and fell to one knee. But then, the operator triggered the auxiliary battery. With sparks flying and coolant hissing, the machine stood again and kept firing. Behind it, human infantry surged forward. Not because they were ordered, but because they chose to. That moment lit something inside them. The line wasn't just holding, it was pushing. The Imperials fell back under the combined pressure of bullets, fire, and fear. Their lines broke as squads lost cohesion. For the first time in their campaign, they routed. Some humans didn't survive to see it. Alden's team was caught in an ambush. Reyes bled out beside a fallen trooper she didn't know by name. The exosuit finally collapsed under artillery fire, a smoldering ruin. Nils didn't crawl out, but the Empire didn't celebrate those kills. They feared what came next. Back aboard their orbiting dreadnoughts, High Command reviewed helmet footage. What they saw wasn't chaos. It was coordination without central control, discipline without dependence on digital infrastructure. Humans fought like cells in a greater organism, decentralized, stubborn, and terrifyingly effective. The head of Imperial Strategic Doctrine issued a private memo. We have underestimated the humans. Their weapons are crude. Their methods savage. But their ability to adapt is unlike anything we've encountered. They learn from pain, and they deliver it with precision. In a central command tent, Vurick circled the next assault point on a hand-drawn map. Tomorrow, she said, we hit them the gorge. No orbital cover. No exfil. Just close combat. Let them bring their tech. We'll bring the war. The gorge was narrow, treacherous, and filled with the smoke of burned-out skirmishes. The Empire's elite units, the Praetorian Vex Guard, were finally deployed, genetically enhanced, clad in adaptive armor, and wielding pulse lances capable of melting steel at range. They weren't sent to suppress or dominate. They were sent to erase. High Command's orders were clear. Break the human resistance, seize control of the outpost, and ensure no further engagements would be necessary. The 51st had failed. Now the Vex Guard would succeed. But they were walking into something they weren't designed for: attrition. Colonel Vurick had prepared the field with relentless focus. She didn't need to match technology. She only needed to match intent. While the Empire readied elite troopers, humanity prepared every inch of the terrain to bleed them. Narrow choke points were rigged with improvised explosive grids. craters filled with thermal sludge, remote-triggered rock slides. Everything built by hand, by will, and by people who didn't know how to give up. When a Vex Guard entered the gorge, their systems reported no resistance, no EM signatures, no movement. They activated cloaked aerial recon units. Every drone was taken out by silent coil guns mounted in caves. The Praetorians advanced anyway, their arrogance intact. 10 minutes in, the first explosion took out the lead formation. Not from above, from below. A buried fuel line, ignited by a manual detonator, turned the rock under their boots into a pressure wave that shattered bones through armor. As they scrambled to recover, automatic grenade launchers opened up from 3 separate elevations. The angles were wrong. The Empire's armor couldn't compensate for attack vectors from below and behind at once. Still, the Vex Guard pressed forward. They were built to withstand high-caliber impacts. But what they weren't built for was relentlessness. Human units rotated in short cycles, 3-minute bursts of fire, reposition, re-engage. They used old terrain maps, not satellites. They dragged ammunition by hand. They communicated by colored smoke and vibration sensors buried in the ground. No signals to jam. No code to intercept. Inside one cave network, a group of conscripts manned a belt-fed gun. None of them were soldiers. One had been a teacher, another a chef. The youngest had never fired a weapon before this campaign. But they worked the trigger, fed the belt, changed barrels, and whispered range calls like they'd been born in the trenches. They didn't need experience. They had necessity. The Vex Guard tried breaching maneuvers. Shock charges, kinetic hammers, short-range teleport bursts. It worked once. The next time they tried, they appeared inside a pre-mined structure rigged with tungsten flechettes. The entire squad was shredded in a second. The mistake wasn't the tech. It was the assumption that better tech meant better war. Verrick watched the advance slow to a crawl. Her officers reported ammo levels dropping, casualties climbing, fatigue mounting. But her response was steady. Hold pressure. Let the Empire carry the weight of its pride. By hour 5, the Vex Guard had reached the Central Valley. What remained of them, less than half their original strength, set up a fortified command node. They believed they had reached the core of the resistance. They were wrong. As the Imperials dug in, the air began to shift. Not with weapons, but with sound. Across the cliffs, over the rocks, through the dust, came the low, rattling growl of rotating barrels. The humans didn't send drones. They didn't send tanks. They brought in a convoy of retrofitted gun carriers, jury-rigged transports mounted with quad-barrel machine guns and autocannons originally meant for anti-orbital defense. These weren't precise. They weren't subtle. They were meant to end everything in their line of fire. The sound was deafening. Thousands of rounds per minute tore through armor, stone, and personnel alike. The Vex Guard's adaptive plating couldn't reset fast enough. The human gunners didn't stop. They didn't slow down. They fired until barrels glowed red, swapped the mid-volley, and kept going. The Imperials tried retreat. There was none. Behind them, the gorge entrance collapsed deliberately by a human demolition team that buried themselves under the rubble to do it. No path out, no comms, no relief, just a grinding, endless punishment of kinetic fury. When it was finally over, there were no Imperial survivors in the valley. Later, recovery teams would retrieve wreckage and twisted armor fragments. Not one usable helmet. Not one intact energy cell. Every trace of Imperial might have been ripped apart, melted, or buried under layers of spent brass and scorched rock. On the human side, they counted their dead. 38. Their names were etched into steel plates and bolted to the canyon wall. No speeches, just action. The survivors cleaned weapons, reset traps, and prepared for the next assault, if one ever came. High above, the Empire's fleet went silent. Strategists watched the footage, trying to make sense of it. Analysts argued. Commanders raged. Politicians panicked. Thalvarek issued no further orders. The Empire called human weapons primitive. They called their tactics outdated. They called their methods trash. Now, they called them something else, effective. Because in the end, it wasn't about the tech. It was about what a species was willing to endure and what they were willing to become to survive. And humanity had made one thing very clear. They weren't just survivors. They were the apex predators of war.